Another blazing hot day. I think it's about 35 degrees in here. I've just come out after work and opened the door, get some air through, but I'm still waiting for the primer for the petrol tank. It's nearly been 3 weeks now, which is ridiculous. So once it arrives, I'll be making a complaint with that particular company. It's not the company's fault. Well, it is the company's fault for using who are known to be the worst couriers in the country. So hopefully may arrive tomorrow. We'll see. But I've made a little sort of cup thing. So a piece of tube with it's actually a washer I machined down, and that's been TIG brazed into there with a fitting on the bottom, silver soldered in place for a plug. And this is going to go on the bottom of the fuel tank to be a drain. And what I'll do is I will drill a hole in the bottom of the tank, but I'll make the hole smaller than the diameter of this. So the hole will probably be about 1 inch in diameter. So what that'll give me is a hole in the bottom of the tank, but a kind of lip around the edge of this. And the thinking there is any sediment that goes to the bottom of the tank, if it falls down through that hole into this little bowl here, it'll keep out of the main fuel pickup area, and when you drain out the tank, hopefully you can sort of flush that out. That's the idea. We'll see how well it works. I think I'll probably TIG braze that to the bottom of the tank. It's probably the best way to do it. I'm going to practice that first though, because this is reasonably thick and this is quite thin steel. It's about half the thickness. I need to practice to make sure I don't just burn through it. But even though I'm still waiting on the primer, I did get another delivery today, which was I think it was $37 in the end, box of random vintage car parts. And I haven't actually gone through this yet, so this will be interesting. There's some random bits of trim. I don't know what those are off. Things like this are funny. This is absolutely no use to me whatsoever, of course. But there's probably someone somewhere who needs this. It's just a matter of how do you find them. These are little fuse blocks. And there are some little, yes. I think these are little dash lights. There's a bulb. This is it's either a fuse box cover or a junction box cover. A Lucas one. That's interesting. I suspect that's some kind of resistor. Is that even a car part? I'm not sure, I can't quite see what it says on it. Need to clean up. More little fuse blocks. I don't know what that is. I did say it was a random box of parts. This is another, it looks like a Lego spaceman helmet, but I'm guessing that probably goes on one of these. This is I think they call them acorn nuts. This is for a coil or a distributor, I believe. What else is there? That's a vacuum unit. Another Lucas one. It's another piece of trim. With another it looks like the end of a banana terminal. Another piece of trim. Again, not sure what it's off. That will be a solenoid from a headlight dipping mechanism, possibly. It does look similar to the ones in my Rotax things, so I suspect that's what that is. Ah, there's another little light. That's very cool. One good one of these makes the whole cost of the box worthwhile, because these aren't cheap. Oh, that's an oiler. That's a little oil cup. It's neat. These are definitely little fuse holders, although is part of that missing, or does the fuse go in that side? Not sure. That looks like the top of a dynamo, something like that. Oh, it's a locking petrol cap with the key. Now that's probably worth something to someone. Again, no idea what car that's off. Interesting. This is a little junction box. These were also something I was hoping would be in there because they're very useful. There's a little lid. That'll be one of the lids. Another little fuse block. Another fuse block. Another junction box. This is just a bulb holder. That looks like a carbon brush. No idea. This is a grease nibble. I think I've actually got a grease gun that fits this style of things. I can't remember what these are used on. Possibly Rolls Royces, vintage Rolls, I'm not sure. It's the only one of those I've seen. I'm guessing that's an ashtray, maybe, or just another piece of trim. Yeah, I don't think it's an ashtray. You could use it as one. And another little Lucas fuse box. So that's all rusty. So that's not too bad. I'm not sure if this is I'm guessing it's a number plate light, or is it an actual dash lamp? This one seems to have a button or a switch on it, so a switch. Interesting. It was worth it for the small amount that it cost, and these little fuse things I can use, so that's good. The little junction boxes, I mean, you can definitely use those. I wonder if... Oh, I don't think so. No, it seems to have a single bayonet type thing. I don't think it's for those. There's that. There's no glass for these, unfortunately. But interesting little pieces. And if anyone knows what this would fit, I can probably put that back on the auction site and sell that to someone who can use it. If it works. So I'll come back to those later and sort them out. Next thing to do will be turn this upside down and drill the hole and attach this. I have welded, or rather TIG brazed, the little cup to the bottom of the tank. It's still hot, So I'll give it a good clean up and make sure it doesn't look like there are any holes or anything. But I think that's a fairly solid kind of weld. I probably should have removed my filler cap and the fiber washer first. That's been sitting there smoking away. And it should be fine. So there is about an inch, a bit bigger than an inch diameter hole, maybe, no, it was probably about an inch, underneath that. So it comes down and there's a little lip effectively. So as I say, the idea being any crap sort of lying on the bottom of the tank eventually should find its way into there, and when you remove the drain it should take any sediment out with it. I'm just going to leave that to clean or dry, cool rather, and then we will clean it up. And the other thing I will need to do is I will make a hole in the under tray underneath that filler plug. I'll have to figure out exactly where that is, and then you'll be able to get to it from underneath the car. If I've measured everything correctly, the bung should be above the floor level, so it shouldn't stick down through the under tray, and then I can fit like a rubber blanking grommet just to keep it a bit cleaner inside there. The other thing I may need to do is, somebody did mention this to me, that little hole might be a little bit too small to let air in when the SU pump is sucking fuel out, so I may need to increase that just a little bit. That shouldn't be too hard to do. The hole, it's a cross hole, so the hole through the end is the same diameter as this tube, which is, I think it's 5/16, so I can open up that little hole in the end there. This is the tank sitting back in the car. I've left one end off because I realized the easiest way to figure out where to drill the hole for the drain plug was to leave one of the ends off, put the tank in the car with the filler plug left out, and just mark through with a marker pen from above. I just made sure that the filler was perfectly vertical. I measured it with an angle gauge, which it is. So that's the fuel tank done. The reason, I think I've mentioned this before, the reason I didn't go for the really big extended range type fuel tank is because it sticks into the tail here, and I'm not sure if they'd let me do that on this car. They probably would, because I could say it was original, but one of the rules for modern cars is it can't be outside the chassis, so I think they would get upset because the chassis sort of ends there, and this is all just timber and lightweight steel, so I think they'd be worried if I got whacked in the back it would puncture the tank. And I think I've mentioned before, the only thing I have to be careful of is when I put the stays in for the guards, I need to make sure they can't go through the little mounts, because then they would puncture the tank if it gets hit in the side. I think that's all I can do on this at the moment. Hopefully the weld through primer arrives, because this thing's already starting to surface rust a little bit. I do need to make the pickup tubes as well. Go in there. Now these fittings get interesting. So these are British standard pipe fittings. This is, I believe, a 1/4 inch, even though it's about a 1/2 inch diameter thread. And the way those pipe fittings work is it's measured around the size of the pipe that the fitting goes on. And I think it's the outside bore of the pipe that the fitting goes on. It gets quite confusing. Something like that. It also gets confusing about whether you can put or how you can mix and match taper threads with parallel threads. And I did check all of this, and this is all legitimate. These taper threads will screw down into this and do up tightly. So all I need now is that primer, and I can start finishing this off. The little hole, you can probably see it, it's just underneath there. It's an 1.25 inch hole, which is easily big enough to get a socket through, and I can get a little rubber blanking grommet to cover that off. The instrument panel, I don't think any of those little lights I've got will work as instrument lights. That's one of the reasons I was waiting, was if there was a nice instrument light in there, I would have mounted that on the instrument panel. So I think I can go ahead and start drilling the holes for in that now. That'll probably be my job this weekend if that primer doesn't arrive. It's the weekend now, and I'm still waiting on the primer so I can finish the petrol tank. It's been nearly 3 weeks now, so I'll ring up and complain on Monday. But the next thing to do with the tank, once it's finished, is figure out the straps that are going to hold it in place. And I've decided what I'll do is I've ordered some stainless steel straps. They're actually called, I've forgotten what they're called. There's a name for them. It's basically very similar to this stuff. It's used in building. It comes perforated like this, and it's for nailing framing and things like that together, and holding it together. So I've ordered some straps. They're 1 inch wide and 0.9 mil thick, so reasonably thick. Stainless steel, not galvanized like these ones, but they'll be very similar to those. And that's what I'm going to use to make the main part of the strap. And I'm going to make them in 2 halves. The bottom half, there will be a strip of 3mm steel that wraps around this, just a sort of J shape. And one end of the strap will be probably riveted to that steel, or bolted to the steel. So it'll go that way, come up here, which keeps this side of the strap fairly straight. I'll have a little wooden block that goes here so I don't crush this seam. It'll come up and over, and then the other half can bolt straight to that cross member across there. If I've got this right, it's a little bit off, but the strap should go straight down to that. And then at the top here, one strap comes up and loops back like that. This one comes around, loops like that, and you've got 2 little metal bars, one of them drilled through and one of them threaded, so you can put a bolt through that draws those 2 straps together. That's the plan anyway. I have to wait till the straps arrive. I'm sort of drawing up a little picture of what it would look like. I could have got the straps from the local, or fairly local, hardware place, but they wanted something like $10 each for them, and I'd have to drive and get them. I found them online for $3 each, and even with the postage, it's cheaper than buying them from the local hardware shop. But again, it means I'm waiting for parts. Always waiting for parts. So I've started working on that, and then I got distracted because I started cleaning up, just trying to organize bits and pieces on my shelving, and going through my pile of bits here was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so I needed to sort that out. And in doing so, I dug up the horn I was going to use, which is this. It's a Prima, made in England, period horn. And what I've done on this is I've actually turned the bracket up the other way to how it arrived. It had the terminals on the top. To do that, to clear the terminals, I've just machined up some little brass spacers to stand the bracket off so the bracket doesn't interfere with the terminals. And I've made a little sort of clamp, I guess you would call it, to go around this front cross member. So this is curved around, comes up and flat, and with a little bit of rubber or something in there, or leather, anything slightly soft and squishy, when you tighten this up, that'll clamp that to this cross member, and this is going to mount there. I wanted to keep it fairly in line with the headlamps and out of the way of the radiator, so I think that'll be the right sort of place for it. So I need to paint those next, but it's actually quite tricky. This is only 3mm mild steel, but it's quite tricky to bend a clamp like that and get it to fit nicely. In the end, I ended up getting out my little torch to try and heat it up. It's my little map gas torch, the sort of yellow one there, and then I decided no, that's way too slow, so I got out the oxyacetylene, which makes really short work of it. But just trying to get a nice bracket and get the curve nice and get the shape nice, it's reasonably fiddly, especially when you've got a 90-degree bend like this. I initially used a piece of galvanized strap, but the problem was with that 90-degree bend, it actually fractured, cracked all the way through. So I went back to mild steel, and that's the other reason I used heat, so that I could bend it without fatiguing it too much. But that seems nice and strong. I just sanded it up, gave it a bit of shape. Doesn't really need it, but that shape matches the bottom of the mounting bracket for the horn. And I'll need to make up 2 more similar to this, but they don't need this bend. So that will be my sort of J pieces here. I realized that the 3mm is strong enough. Once you bend it, if this just goes up like that, if you hook a strap on here, once you tension that up, this isn't going to bend. So it doesn't need to loop all the way around the way I drew it on there. I think that's going to work fine. And again, because it loops underneath this cross member, it's going to be pulling the tank down. So that's not going to go anywhere. And I think that's all I've really done. So tomorrow I think I'll finally get to drill the holes for the instrument panel. Lots of just sitting in the car figuring out where things have to go so that you can see them and reach them. Although, to be honest, reaching things in this car isn't a problem because it's so small. It's more you don't want to put things behind the steering wheel so you can't reach them. But I'm pretty sure that's the layout I'm going to go with. And tomorrow we'll be drilling the holes to make that happen. I have quickly made the 2 brackets that are going to strap the tank down. These are much easier to make. You just sort of hammer it around a suitable bar in the vise, and because there's no weird angles on it, you can wrap it almost 180 degrees around. This bar is a little bit undersized, but I find it works better if you wrap it around something smaller and then open it up to the diameter you need. And to do that I used a socket which happens to be about the right sort of diameter, because I found if you make it bigger, make it a little oversized and try to shrink it down, you can't keep it round. I find it much easier to do it this way, and you can keep it more circular. So these will fit just round like that, and pull up on the straps and hold the tank down. And because they're under tension, I think that's all I'll need to actually strap this down. I don't think it needs to be bolted in necessarily. I'm going to put something on these so they don't rust. The next step will be when I get the strips, attach the strips to these. I'll probably paint these first. And then I need to make the little bars, threaded bars that go through to do the loops and things. So those just need a rub down with an oily rag so they don't rust. The other thing I did when I was cleaning up was found my badge, so I've reattached that to the front of the radiator just with some VHB 3M VHB tape, which is kind of it's very high bond. That's what the VHB stands for. It's what they use for sticking logos and badges on and things like that on cars, so that's the perfect stuff to use. That kind of finishes off the radiator. The other thing is I added a strip. When I painted this and put the clear coat on, the little holes I made got ever so slightly smaller, and I found it really hard to get the normal sort of fender bonnet lacing strip through there. So I came up with a different idea, which was just off AliExpress. I bought some leather strip, very, very cheap, the right sort of diameter. I think this is 10 mil to thread through there. I do need to punch the little holes in the ends just to hold the end pieces down, but that'll work fine for that bonnet lacing. On this side, it seems to vary. Some cars use just lacing screwed down. Other cars use a rubber section. I think I'm going to do it with the rubber section, which is what I did on my Austin 7. And this stuff I can get locally. It's this kind of rubber. Noticed my bonnet isn't sitting very well, but that's okay. And when this is all pulled down, it just gives you that nice seam there. And I just put some paint on that other bracket, just so that doesn't rust. I think that's basically all I can do for now. So the next job tomorrow will be the instrument panel, I think. Today I am working on the instrument panel. I want to get some holes put in it. So I've just been marking it out where I want everything to go, and I'm just doing a check with the actual gauges just to make sure that the brackets and the mounting clamps and all of those kind of things are going to fit where I need them to fit. But it's looking pretty good. The interesting thing with this instrument panel is most of these gauges are mechanical. So I've got a mechanical clock, that's the ammeter, mechanical water temperature gauge, mechanical speedo, mechanical tachometer, and mechanical oil gauge. So there won't be a lot of wiring needed. This will be the wiring for the ignition and fuel pump and the ignition lamp, and the wiring for the lights and various things will come out the back of the Rotax switch unit. So now that that's all marked out, I need to start making some holes. This is just to show how I actually make the holes. There's lots of different ways you could do this, I guess. If you had a really good set of hole saws, you could use those, but I find they always kind of rip up the edges of the hole a little bit. It works better if you can clamp the metal between two pieces of wood. Of course, then you don't know exactly where to drill the holes. So you'd have to lay it all out on the wood first, clamp it, and then drill through it. I don't actually have hole saws the right size anyway, so I have to do it by hand. You could do it with a jigsaw, I guess, but again, that's going to rip up the edges. So I use my panel nibblers. It's very painful because you can see it only takes little pieces each time. And the other thing I find with these is theoretically that's got a taper on it, a little bit of a draft angle. So you should be able to take a notch and then push this back up through the hole. But I find that can be tricky. So what I end up having to do is you always end up having to push this up and slide it around. kind of like that, because it's really hard to push this up through the hole it's just made. And that's why there are these little notches every so often, because that gives me a place that's easier to push this back up through to take out the hole. But I find this gives a really nice hole. It just takes a minimal amount of filing. Or I'll probably use one of my little sanding drums on it just to clean up the edges once I'm done. I think this one piece has taken about a quarter of an hour, so I'm going to do the rest of them now. Another little trick I use, which is probably obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me until I figured it out. I always make these holes a little bit undersized so I can file them out to the correct size. So the gauges don't quite fit in yet. And when I'm trying to make a hole like this bigger, I find it helps if I make a line, use a Sharpie and run a line of Sharpie around the outside of the hole, trying to keep the width as even as possible. And then when I'm filing it to make the hole bigger, you can see how much Sharpie is left. So you know you're keeping it circular, and you know that that Sharpie line is about 2 millimeters wide, so you kind of know how big you're making the hole. Otherwise, if you try to do it freehand, it gets quite easy to make the hole oval. Like I say, maybe that's completely obvious to people, but until I figured that out, I used to hand file things and they'd go uncircular. I have all of the holes cut out in my instrument panel. I've given it a bit of a clean with some carb cleaner. I random orbit sanded it with, I think it was 120 grit, and then I used a red Scotch-Brite to just sort of scuff it up, and then finished up with one of the fine grey Scotch-Brites. When you do that, you get lots of black gunk coming up, and it's actually really hard to clean it off. You can sort of see if I spray it there. It's quite hard to keep it clean. So this will all dull down nicely, I think, which is good. So everything fits. I've got a little bit of room here to put the final piece that'll go on the instrument panel, which we'll get to at some other point. There's one thing wrong with this, which I knew about and then forgot when I was marking out the panel. I was being very careful to make sure everything clears all the mounting brackets, but I think this one might be a little bit close. So the problem there is just that the gauge will hit the bracket. Put it there like that. You can see the corner of it just gets in the way. So that's pretty easy. That just needs a angle grinder, and I can just remove part of that bracket. I think the rest of them clear, so I will do that now and then put this in and see what the instruments look like when they're mounted to it. This is the instrument panel mounted in the car. It was pretty simple to cut the corner off the sort of bracket over there and touch up the paint. So now hopefully the gauge will go in. So that's the next step, is I guess do a test fit of all the instruments and switch gear. So this is all the instruments in place. And it's a bit hard to show what the driver's eye view is, but something like that. The oil pressure gauge is behind the steering wheel spoke, but it's either that or you have the spokes at 45 degrees and you can't see the tachometer. but you can actually see the oil pressure. If you're going straight ahead and you can see the needle, something's wrong, probably. These run quite high pressure. It'll be 60, somewhere up here normally. Here's the Rotax panel. So this is for your lights. And the starter, tachometer, speedometer, water temperature, clock, and ammeter. I need to make a new mounting bracket for the ammeter. Now these gauges are a little bit out of period. So for example, this is a little bit too late. The oil pressure gauge is a little bit too late. I don't have the proper ones, so that's the problem. But they're not too bad. They are meant to be backlit, so you might be able to see there's little windows behind these. So I may look at putting some lighting behind here, so that at night these instruments are actually lit up. The tachometer doesn't have that. The oil pressure does, and the speedo does. So the other thing I want to do is, I think I've got some red perspex somewhere, so I'll machine up a little red lens to go in there. There was the remains of it's probably celluloid, but that hadn't survived over time, so that had popped out. I think I can machine up a little disc of red plastic, and that can push into there. I can still get to the gear lever. And this is the choke, and this one is the speedometer cable, which I'm going to kind of have to loop around because that needs to go into there basically, which is a little bit of a pain in terms of not tripping over that cable or this wire. So I'll have to figure out the best way to route that so that it's out of the way. Probably loop up round like that somehow. But that should look pretty good. You have to remember there's a sort of padding, a combing that goes all the way around here. And the winder for the clock is just under here. Clock isn't actually bolted in yet. So yeah, I'm fairly pleased with how that's come out. Of course, if you're not happy with it, you can always end up making another one. But I think that should work fairly well for now. Just playing with the gauges again. You'll notice the ammeter is missing. It turns out that meter didn't actually work. I never got around to testing it. So I thought I'd better give it a try, and no, it doesn't go, unfortunately. And I also remembered that I've got a slightly more period correct oil pressure gauge, which is the one I've actually been using on the engine. I'd forgotten it was just hanging down there. So that's the one I was going to use in the first place. That does 0 to 100, which is good. And I've also, might be a bit tricky to see, but I've made the gauges look a little bit better by taking some of the shine off the bezels. I went through my box of other gauges. I've got a whole bunch of them, and I found this, another ammeter. This one's actually made in Sydney, so that kind of works for a car down this end of the world, I suppose. And I've taken the case of that because the paint was all flaking off. That's sitting in the evaporust. I'll give that another coat of paint. And what I found is if I take especially to these older ones where the chrome is all coming apart anyway, if you take a red Scotch pad to it and just sort of rub them around a little bit, it takes off any flaky chrome and it dulls it down, and it gives much more of a sort of nickel finish, which is much better. So that's what I've been doing to the gauges. If you go down far enough, you probably go right through to the copper underneath the chrome. So that's what's happened here. You can see it's corroded off. That wasn't me who did that. So that's that helps, I think. I may need to do the speedometer. Just takes a little bit of that chromy look to it off. So I'm going to repaint that ammeter. That'll go back in. I need to make a bracket for the clock. Turns out I don't have a suitable bracket for that. I thought it had one when I got it, but if it did, I don't know where I've put it. I think that one would be too short, but it's just a simple metal strap. That's not hard to make. And I've got a little bit of space if I do need to add any more. There's room for one other gauge that could go in there. The reason I've got the oil gauge there is because that's where they were on a lot of the original cars. So I'm just sticking with originality. But there's room there for if I do need any more switches or bits and pieces. One thing I am considering is, even though this car wouldn't have come with them, originally I think this car only would have had one stoplight, which isn't allowed now. So I'm gonna have two stoplights mounted sort of here and on the other side. And I'm wondering about adding indicators by making the stop lamps or the marker lamps flash, which is how a lot of American cars work, I believe. But I'm not sure what the rules are around that, so I need to look that up. My thinking is I can make the marker lamps flash, so there will be little side markers that go on top of the guards, and you can make those flash. Or the other thing that would be quite good is if you could, I'm sure I could do it now with the LEDs, have the amber LEDs flashing. I know other people fit modern small LEDs somewhere so that you have got indicators, but it's hard to make them, or to get them that look period correct enough. Even if they're small, they're going to look out of place. So I'm trying to figure out, is there a way I can do it with the existing lamps? I don't actually have the lamps for here yet. I need to find something suitable for those. I do have the rear lamps though. So that's kind of how it looks. I don't even know if the camera can actually see this, if it's picking it up, but I've rubbed down the bezel on the Speedo. The chrome on that was actually really thin. It started going through to the brass. So it's good. It's taken the shine off it, and it now matches the clock a lot better. So I think I'm a lot happier with how that looks. It's a lot less 50s, 60s shiny chrome, and more sort of 30s duller nickel, I guess.